Welcome, everyone. We will call the meeting to order, and I'll go ahead and turn the workshop portion over to Dr. Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Education's work session. So what I'd like to call your attention to on our agenda is to item 4, communication with the board under director's comment. We'll just follow that order. And so the first item is the student refund procedure. Just a little background on this. As you know, we've had a lot of different routes to take in response to COVID-19, and this is particular to fundraising efforts that we had students participate in their families for specific field trip and activities, and then weren't able to make those trips. And in our accounting manual, we had no provision that we could, procedurally refund those when they were raised specifically. So we have worked with auditors and what we have, we think, is an approved remedy that will allow us, because of COVID-19, to refund money specifically. And so I would just call your attention to that in your agenda packet. This would be in the form of administrative procedure. In our research, it doesn't require a board approval, but I wanted to share this with you. And I would ask that we address it again in the meeting, just so that we make sure that it does get into the minutes. And I'm going to pause here for just a second. Mrs. Deloach did a lot of the work on this, and I'm going to ask her if she has any comments to make more specifically. But this would become effective immediately after this evening. Then that would allow us to refund money that were specifically raised for specific field trips or activities that students weren't able to realize. Mr. Loach.
So this is a circumstance that we normally do not face. For instance, we normally don't have specific fundraisers just for a trip. All of our field trips are usually just a fee basis, but this was an end of the year trip that was a rather large expense. So they did some fundraisers that were specific for that at some schools. We have talked to the comptroller's office, we've talked to our third-party auditors, and we've also talked to TSBA, and we think this is the best way to approach that to get the parents their money back.
So I would just, I know that we've received inquiries here. I've personally received, and I know in talking with some board members that you have as well. So this is a remedy for that, and it is specific to these conditions. So it would not carry over. So I would just ask if any board members have any comments or questions about this.
Trying to unmute. There you go. The only comment I would have is that several parents had brought this to me, and I just want to thank you guys very much, Ingrid and Dr. Cox, both for working through this. It was an unusual event, but it was a significant amount of money, just like Ingrid said, with some people. So I, for one, thank you very much, and I know it's going to make a lot of people very happy.
Anyone else? Okay. Like I said, if I may, just briefly in our business meeting, even though it doesn't require action, if I could just make a comment on it so that the minutes will reflect that this is a change in our procedure. Okay. Next up, under director's comments, I wanted to have Ms. Deloach give you an update on the budget, primarily concerning revenues that have changed, or revenue information that's changed since our last meeting. So, Ms. Deloach, if you could.
We have received communications from the state finance department, and they have confirmed that the governor has removed the 2% increase in the BEP funding for the salary component. So that resulted in $464,000 of a reduction for us in revenues that were anticipated. The budget that we presented would be $464,000 short in BEP. So that would require us to, if we want to continue with that budget, we need to make an amendment to that. And we would need to find another revenue source or supplement from the reserve account.
So this, at this point, is information. We don't have a recommendation for action this evening. The budget committee, has not made a recommendation to the full commission, and of course they've been affected by the COVID-19 as well regarding schedule. So they've had to postpone and cancel several meetings, but we have been with the budget committee 2 different times. So do you have any questions for me or for Mr. Deloach concerning the revenues or comments about the budget? All right, if not, then we'll go to the next item, which is the Sullivan County Schools reopening plan. And we did want to spend a little bit of time this evening talking about that. As you know, yesterday we did have a press conference cooperatively with the Sullivan County Health Department, Kingsport City Schools, and Bristol City Schools. I wanted to, before I say anything else, take this opportunity to thank the Sullivan County Public Schools lead team, who continue to work tirelessly. It seems like, it's been one long project that we've been working on, but these folks have worked many, many long hours with information that changes and with pretty steep regularity. And I just wanted to acknowledge that work that is ongoing. The plan that was adopted or I guess agreed upon by all the superintendents and the health department. There's a Sullivan County document that was released, but then each individual school system will have an operating manual. And I know we've shared that with you, but I wanted to just this evening touch a few of the highlights. And so Ms. Nave, if you would help me with the notes for the summary there, I think that might be a good thing for us just to take a look at. And if you want to share the screen, that would be a good thing. So basically, in looking at the plan, our operating manual, as the operating manuals for all of the school systems, will follow the same basic principle. If you think about a traffic light, you have 3 colors. You have a green, a yellow, and a red zone. And so these zones are informed by the E curve. That's a part of the Tennessee Department of Health. And you can see there on your screen that Ms. Nave has put up. For the green zone, or the no to minimal spread, it's based on the instances per 100,000 residents over the last 14 days. So if you look at there, you can see at the bottom, the current number for Sullivan County is 3.98. So that, again, is the average rate of new COVID-19 cases per 100,000 county residents over the last 14 days. There's another number there on the right, but it's the average number of new cases in the last 14 days. So the figure that is used in this model is is the number of new cases per 100,000 residents over the last 14 days. And so this is available publicly if you just go to the Tennessee Department of Health, and then you could actually do a Google search for E-curve, and it's pretty easily found if you look at it that way. But in the green zone, it's from 0 to to 5, I guess 5.9 something. The yellow zone would begin at 6.0 to 10.9, and then the red zone would begin at 11. So that if Ms. Nave is showing us the threshold there, excuse me. And so all of the individual plans or the operating manuals for each of the three systems also follow this general guidance. And this was first, I guess, developed by Nashville Public Schools with the health department there. And as you know, Sullivan County has its own health department. It's one of 6 jurisdictions in the state that has its own health department. But this is the measure that we'll be referring to help us move between the zones. So generally, when we're in the green zone, which we are now, because it's below 6, right now we're planning on opening our schools. We'll talk a little bit later this evening about calendar issues, but we would open wherever possible. We would socially distance. The meals will be grab and go. Of course, we'll be doing extra cleaning like we were at the end of the school year. No sharing of community resources. Planning of events to limit the size of attendees. Encourage wearing of face masks. And I want to be clear about that. This is one of the things we've been asked a lot about. We are not requiring face masks in this phase. We are encouraging, though, because that's the best medical advice that we have, that whoever will and can to please wear masks or covering. Of course, frequent hand washing and sanitizing, and then practice utilizing online teaching on Wednesdays from the start of school, just to get this. This is with students present, where we would acquaint students with the digital format, and partnering with parents to monitor students' health at home. We will ask parents to help us out to make sure that they do frequent temperature checks and then talk with their kids. If we should need to move into the yellow zone, then this would be potentially an altered state. Again, this was when the community number of cases per 100,000 over the last 14 days would be beyond 6. These are the things that we would consider, but in using the words of Dr. May, there are certain factors that he uses the word tincture. It's not an absolute. We would, of course, have that conversation before we would move into a yellow zone. We would consider then a K to 2 students would attend 5 days a week, with 3 through 12 on an altered schedule. There we have worked out that potentially it would be an AA-BB schedule with everyone in attendance on Wednesdays. Large-scale events of no more than 50 would be discontinued. We would still encourage added safety measures, of course, continued extra cleaning and the continuation of grab and go, and then limited access to visitors, okay? And then if we have to move to the red zone, basically it's how we ended the school, where where all of the learning is remote and or online. So the yellow zone, of course, is going back to that. That's we would want to pause before we would even get into that, and make sure that that there were, let's say that we had a high number of cases that were limited to nursing homes. That might be an example of where the number would not be an absolute just because you hit the 6 mark. That would be an automatic thing that you'd have to do. But we do have to have a continuous learning plan that we file with the state. This was about a week old, I guess, requirement that we were given, where we will have to file this plan with the state. But I will emphasize that that these plans are very, very much in draft form. we have met initially with our principals to talk about this. We will work continuously with them, and we will be in our retreat next week, and we will have very detailed plans that are not only district specific, but also will be building specific, because we recognize that each building has its own physical characteristics, layouts that will need some customization. I want to thank our parents who participated in our survey. We have a survey that's active now with our teachers. And so, again, this is very much in draft form. We wanted to share this information with the board and the public this evening, and just be as transparent as we could about that. But again, to emphasize and reiterate that the operating manual for our school system still is very much in draft form. So I'm going to pause there. We're going to talk about some different aspects of this effort. We're going to share with you the parent survey summary, and then we're excited to talk about our virtual learning academy that Dr. Palmer will talk about that would be available for our students whose parents are not ready to send them back full time. So I'm going to pause here and see if board members have any questions or comments.
I have a question. The 14-day, is that a rolling average for 14 days that's going to appear at the bottom left every time?
I'm not exactly sure, but I believe that that's a consecutive 14 days.
So it would change on a daily basis, or has
Yes.
the potential to do that?
Yes.
You are emphasizing that just because it changes and someone sees that number go up, that doesn't mean we are immediately changing to.
That's right. And to just kind of repeat what Dr. May said, is that the numbers are not absolute, that you would need to, using his word, tincture those numbers.
I think that's crucial for parents and teachers both to understand that just because that number changes on a report that you'll see on that state website, that doesn't mean automatically we're going to the yellow zone. And we need to make sure we emphasize that with
That's absolutely correct.
Dr. Cox, to add to that, if the peak zone would be in the nursing home population, then that would not affect us. That wouldn't affect school attendance.
Well, I use that as an example of a situation where the numbers could, really drive the total number higher. But that's where you would need to have the deeper conversation with our health department to see if that was something that you could factor out. So there are so many scenarios that could create spikes in numbers that we just have to have those conversations about.
I have another question on the yellow zone. I noticed the high school there, you said it's going to have alternating schedules basically every other day, and one day they all would come to school. Is Kingsport and Bristol going to participate at the high school level at the same way?
Each school system will be doing that slightly differently. This is an idea that we have come up with as a possibility if we have to move to an alternate schedule. So the discussion has been that an AABB, meaning that you need it in person, for example, Monday, Tuesday, gives you 2 consecutive days, and then another group of students would meet in person on Thursday, Friday, and then Wednesday would be a virtual learning day for everyone. So it could vary. It probably would vary from school system to school system.
I have some strong concerns about not knowing what my schedule is if I'm a student and a parent. Many times, even though students in the 8th or 9th grade, they don't want to leave the children at home. And I think with a schedule like that, you wake up each morning and say, what day of the week is it? What do I need to do today? So I would like for you to go back and revisit that and come up with some continuity of, so parents would know what the schedule is. And that in itself, when you alternate the schedule, is difficult to make sure that you are getting the students there on time and make sure that they are supervised at home. Because the parents have to make decisions for their work schedules also. And if we go into a yellow zone and don't have that down ironclad, they will be confused, as I would be if I woke
Right.
up.
It's something, as again, I say this is a draft thought, but when you have to more strictly socially distance, you're fairly limited on how you can do that. So we discussed some different ways to do that as alternating days. One county system, their plan is that students in this scenario would only physically go one day a week. And depending on, what group you're in, we talked about alternating weeks. So you have A weeks and B weeks. We hope that we don't have to implement this, obviously, but the thought behind doing the AABB is for the continuity of instruction, and it would, if you're in that, I think we could communicate to parents that in your child's group, these are the days that you would go, so it would stay the same. So I know that if we're under this plan, my day would be Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday that I would be physically going, and then the balance of the time would be. So, there's not really a good or perfect way to do alternating schedules. We just hope that we don't have to do that.
Dr. Cox, I'm a little confused. AABB, now that would be a solid 2-day block they would attend. They couldn't decide, am I going to school or am I going to be online? I mean, I'll choose this day what I'm going to do. Does that change?
No, it would be that students would be assigned to a schedule, and they would know ahead of time that if we have to move into the yellow zone and use this, that my days would be either Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, or if you did it anyway, I mean, whether it's AB or ABC, you would know which days that you would be physically attending, and that would stay constant depending on the group. And I would just invite any other member of the team to comment if you have something to add.
Let me ask another question related to that. Would they be assigned based on grade level or teachers? Because we have ninth graders and 10th graders in classes together, and juniors and seniors.
I think there's a number of ways to do that, with considering that families might need to have kids in the same family on the same schedule.
I would just add, our thought.
I'm just going to jump in and tell you again, this is such a work in progress that we talked about even maybe doing it by alphabet. And again, making those allowances for those students who maybe they don't have the same last name or something like that, that we could work with them in the buildings to do that. So you would just take, for instance, in a high school, you would take your entire roster and try to figure out if you're dividing it in half, you would divide that in half and assign those kids that way. And then again, they have students at younger grade levels, which, they probably want those high schoolers home with them, that we would try to make those accommodations in the building so that they would be able to do that regardless of the building they were in.
And Ms. Buckles, I think you had a comment to make.
I really was just going to say what Karen said. Our thought behind that really was more alphabet than grade driven, because when you got to high school, grade driven didn't help to separate if you had all ninth graders there and you were in the ninth grade English class, that didn't really help us to take out part of the population to keep the numbers down. So we do realize that there might be families that maybe have different last names, but those things can be accommodated. So our thinking really was, I would know from the start, my child was always an A student, so they would always go on Monday, Tuesday of every week and online the rest. And if my child was a B student, they always went on Thursday, Friday, so that there would not be that confusion, that once we started, they were always on the same schedule.
But I'm concerned that if a math teacher is teaching algebra and she has ninth graders and 10th graders in that class, and on Monday, she's going to have part of the class, and then on Tuesday, she's going to have a different part. Is that correct?
So the students that are not there physically present would be able to Zoom in or Google Meet or some type of electronic format, so they see the lesson as well.
That's an important point. It's students are participating every day, and attendance is taken every day for every student. So you have kids attending either in person or virtually 5 days. Physically, under this plan, they would be there for 2 days.
If I were attending on Monday, Tuesday, but I got sick, would I have the means to either Google or Teams? Would I, if I were sick at home, but could still participate that way, even if I was supposed to be in person?
Yes.
You may have actually said it early in the thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Randall. I'll talk after.
I was going to say, if you're doing it alphabetically, though, potentially you could have one teacher with the her full class there if the alphabet didn't break down correctly. Could you not? You know, they could end up with A through G, the entire class, and if that's what was assigned for that day, they would be able to social distance.
It's possible, and I think you're going to have so many different scenarios, and it depends on the class and the size of the class. There are a lot of factors. Yeah.
Well, I've worked with alternative schedule before, and I thought it was a great idea when I came up with it, and it was a disaster. We had Tuesday, Thursday classes, Monday, Wednesday classes, and on Friday everybody had to meet, and that meant each day of the week you had to figure out what day it was. When you called a substitute teacher, the substitute teacher said, which group am I meeting with today? And we survived the year with it that way, but it was not a pleasant year. And I would just ask you to really look at the details when you start making the assignments.
Sure. And again, that's why we're saying it's draft. And I'll repeat that nobody wants to have to shift to the schedule. But if it is the in between, which is really hard to do, and everybody would prefer to have every student every day. But if we are in a community health situation where we're not able to do that, we just simply don't have the wherewithal to have everybody there every day, and in a lot of cases we can't socially distance enough to accommodate that it would be a have-to case before we would want to even entertain this. But we need to have plans for all these different contingencies.
So Dr. Cox, we're saying in the yellow zone, there's no way we could accommodate all of our students at once. We're in that zone now. Is that what you're saying?
No, we're in the green zone.
Exactly.
We're in the green zone. Yeah.
So in the green zone,
everybody
can attend completely. Yes.
So green is good.
So we're on green go at this point.
That's right.
But chances are we'll be in the yellow zone if it keeps going with looking at those numbers, and we got to go through the yellow before we go to red. And
that's correct.
I guess I only have one question, and you may have covered, and I apologize because my computers gave me a little trouble there for a moment. But if we go from green to yellow, are we going to try to go for like a week at a time? Or is it going to be a daily pop back and forth? Because if we go into yellow, it would kind of probably make a lot more sense in my mind if I were a parent trying to, this is what my week is going to look like. I mean, but then again, I guess maybe it would be good if I could say, well, they can go all back the next day. But it just seems like if we're going to go with something, we would be more than just a daily decision.
No,
Or
I mean, we would anticipate we would start a week.
Okay.
And you know, we would want to give ample time, you know, for that adjustment. And I couldn't imagine doing anything less than a week schedule, and hopefully more than that.
And the other thing is, and I wasn't able to pull that sheet up that's on the wall there. It's talking about is it the bottom left or the bottom right number? It's the bottom left.
It's the bottom left number. The average rate of new COVID-19 cases per 100,000 residents over the last 14 days. So that's a very important distinction.
Can we get a commitment that we would get at least a week's notice if we're changing from green to red? I mean, this is a local decision, if I understand it correctly, if I read the procedure manual correctly.
I think that's a real important thing that we can do, and I think the circumstances would have to be just really dire for us not to be able to give at least a week's notice.
These numbers, I mean, we've got the 14 days, so it should be something you're able to project that it's going that direction. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is when it happens.
That's true. You know, I could imagine a situation where the numbers might just really spike significantly. But you know, we've got to temper that with reasonability. That parents need time to make the adjustments. But again, we hope to stay in green as much as possible.
Is this very similar to value added, Karen? Rolling 3-year average, and this one's a rolling 14-day average?
I hate to take a guess at that.
Well, again, we wanted to share this with you. That's why we call it draft, because you know, we want to consider lots of inputs before we finalize anything.
Myself, I personally like the 2 days if we go to the yellow, which I hope we don't go to the yellow. But my next question is, when the kids that's doing the virtual from home, they will be able to interact with the teacher, correct?
Okay, we have two different. So Dr. Palmer is going to talk about the Sullivan County Virtual Learning Academy. So that would really be students from the get-go who would opt to just get into the Virtual Learning Academy, because in our survey, we've had some parents tell us that they would just like to start that way. The scenario we're talking about here, Mr. Robinson, is that if we had, let's say that for the kids that are going to be a part of typical classrooms, if we had to change, they're still going to be members of that classroom. It's just that they would be meeting alternatively in person and online. Again, every student would be engaged every day. The difference would be that they would be physically present 2 days of the 5 days and working online 3 of those days.
Yeah, I completely understand all that. I know what we're talking about. My question was, the ones that's at home doing it virtually, will they be able to interact with their teacher?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that question. They will be interacting virtually with their online teacher, yes.
Because I know last year when all this hit, and that was the biggest issue we had with ours, because there's a lot of stuff that was recorded in which it was short notice and it wasn't none of our teachers' faults, and they battled through it and done their best they could. But my kids, the 8-year-old, she struggled more than anything because the interaction wasn't there. And I guess if these kids are at home virtually, they need to be able to ask questions and actually feel like they're part of the class to keep them in it.
Right. So they would have the same online teacher who would be one of our teachers, for the duration. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
Yeah, that's got me. I was just afraid that it was going to be they was just there watching, couldn't ask no questions, and feel like they was kind of left out. And next thing you know, they're looking around and disappear from the computer. So,
well, again, Dr. Palmer will cover that in more specific details, and hopefully that'll clarify it further. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments more about that part before we go on to the parent survey? All right. If not, then Dr. Palmer, would you? I'm sorry, Mr. Spivey.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I just want to say thank you to you and to everybody else, because I think if we're all being honest, we're dealing with a situation that hopefully we don't ever have to deal with again. And I know you all are working hard, and we set policy, but we also have faith in you all. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. As I said before, these folks they continue to work. I don't want to say have worked, because the work is not done, but I can tell you we have immensely and tremendously dedicated people who've worked like Trojans, and I really appreciate that. So thank you, Mr. Spivey, for saying that. Okay. Dr. Palmer?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Dr. Cox, and thank you to the board. I have several things to show you that we've learned over the past several weeks. And Mr. Robinson, I really appreciate your question. I'm going to address that a little bit later, I think, and I think you'll be satisfied with what we have. We've worked really, really hard on an online program, listening to our parents and responding to their needs. And I think you'll be pleased with what you hear that we've done. So let me take just a moment to present my screen. I want to show you a slideshow that I've put together that will, I think, help make clear why we're doing what we're doing and where we are. So let's see if we can make this work. Oh my goodness. Yeah, wrong thing. All right, here we go. So parent survey information. First of all, we thought that many of our families would be very concerned about sending their children back to our buildings. So we attempted to use our parent survey to tell us what we needed to know about our family's concerns and what we needed to do about returning to school. And this is what we learned. First of all, looking at this graph of responses from our parents, it appears that most of our respondents were parents of high school students, but that's not necessarily the case. In high school, of course, we have a higher concentration of students and parents, so that's why that graph looks that way. When you actually look at the response across grade level, you see that's fairly even, with a difference of 4.5 between the highest and the lowest response rate from each grade level. The responses were spread somewhat evenly across each grade band. And that was important to us because we wanted to make sure that when we send out a survey that we get a good response rate, and that we feel like based on the results we received, that they're representative of each of the grade levels and of our schools and parents. And so we felt like on the onset that our information would be reliable. We found that there would be a high rate of reliable internet access at home for most of our families. And we did take into account that in some situations, the ones that would be filling out the survey may not have the best internet, but most folks do have a phone and a smartphone. This survey was accessible to anyone who had a smartphone. They could all fill out the survey. So we felt like this was still a fair question to ask. Most students do not plan to ride the bus in the fall of 2020, but as you can see, at a percentage rate of 42.2, that still is a very large number of students that will be riding the bus or plan to ride the bus for the fall of 2020. So we felt like that was important to know and to understand. And these are this part of the surveys where we sort of got into the meat of what we're trying to find out from our parents as far as, you know, their feelings about school and in relationship to the COVID virus. Most parents and families would rather send their students back to a traditional in-person learning environment with safety precautions. That was made clear here by this survey question. But what we did find was that 18% of families were planning to explore an at-home option and not send their children back to school on campus. 18% of a population is significant. We felt like this was the information that we needed to set us on a course to develop the Virtual Learning Academy. we wanted to make sure that we met the needs of our students and our families, and we felt like this was the best way to do it. And so with that being said, we began to build the nuts and bolts of what we felt like would be a successful program. And in doing so, we felt like there were a few things that were key to building that successful program. Mr. Robinson, as you mentioned before, we want to use our Sullivan County teachers in this program. We also want to use our curriculum. We feel like our teachers are the best around. If we have our teachers involved, it's going to be quality. It's going to be good. And once again, our curriculum has been recognized around the state. I've been to Nashville several times, been to the meetings and seen Sullivan County recognized for their outstanding curriculum. And so I know it's solid. I feel like we put those two things together. It's a marriage made in heaven. With that being said, beginning to work on the nuts and bolts of this, we wanted to get information out to our families as soon as possible because we wanted to set their minds at ease that we had a plan, that we were going to do everything we could to take good care of their students, their safety, and provide a quality education for them. So in doing this, we created this brochure that we sent home to them Monday, July the 6th. We received a lot of information, a lot of feedback from our parents, mostly very, very positive. Thankful that we were starting this program. I can't count the number of phone calls I received from parents thanking us for doing this and excited about the option. The website that we built was published to Sullivan County, attached and published with the Sullivan County website yesterday, July 8th. And since then, our response from our parents has just blown up in a good way. So I'm going to get out of this presentation. I want to go straight to the website. And I don't want to insult your intelligence by reading this to you. I know you can do that on your own. But just to give you an overview, I want to share with you some of the things that we're sharing with our parents. So first of all, this is the homepage of the Virtual Learning Academy website. And we simply make clear on the front side that this program is for K-12, all grade levels. And we present a mission, a vision, and talk about our programs a little bit from the front side, and then answer a lot of general questions that the public may have about this program. One of those of which is that we have no physical location. This is a truly virtual program. Most of these courses, as we say in bullet 2 there, will be taught by Sullivan County teachers with our Sullivan County curriculum. We are going to use a program that we've used for years in high school, a credit recovery program to supply some of the course content. And we feel confident that's going to work really well because it has already for many years. Each student will remain a student of their home school, and we're not charging any tuition to our students for being a part of this program. Once again, not to insult your intelligence, I don't want to read the whole thing to you. We do go through and answer several frequently asked questions that we've encountered from our parents, and we're going to add to that FAQ list here very soon because we've received so many more questions that have become consistent now that we feel like deserve another spot in the FAQ section of this website. We've also included on the homepage of this website an opportunity for students to fill out an application here and to receive information now about what the contract will look like after they register for the class, and once we get past all the parents and students getting signed up that they're interested in this academy, then we will ask them to do a contract with us. And once again, there's the brochure that we talked about earlier. So anyone who did not receive a brochure, of course, they have access to it here. We look forward to putting our teachers' faces and have a little introductory video for each of our teachers to virtually meet their students on the front side before school starts, so they'll know who their teachers are if they're not able to attend school for an orientation. We want them to have the opportunity to see their teacher, know who they are, just like any other student might have the opportunity to do before school starts. We spend time with the curriculum, explaining that the curriculum that we're going to use is, of course, our own. And we talk about the state, and I'll just go to the high school curriculum there for an example. We talk about how the curriculum that we're using, the Sullivan County curriculum, is approved by the State Board of Education, of course, and we talk about the subjects and everything that will be offered here. So, and we even offer a hybrid option. We understand that some courses, especially in the career-focused areas of education in high school, that you can't duplicate. you just can't teach virtual welding. It doesn't work. There's some things healthcare industry wise that you just can't duplicate virtually. And so we are offering options for our families to be able to enroll and be a part of those courses and be a part of the virtual program. So those are some of the big pieces that make up our virtual school. And I feel very comfortable saying that I think we can do this better than anybody. I really feel good about the program that we're building. I have a lot of faith in our teachers and our lead team that's jumped in to help put this all together. And because of their leadership, I think we're building something very dynamic. And the main thing is that we're going to be meeting the needs of our kids and our families in this difficult time. So we're very excited about this. Dr. Cox, is there anything else that you would like for me to cover? And then, board, I'll ask you if you have any questions for me.
No, I think you've done a very comprehensive job, and I just would invite board members to comment or ask questions about the information you've presented.
Dr. Palmer, I have a couple of questions. As far as attendance goes, if a student doesn't log in on a particular day, is that attendance recorded?
We are going to be recording attendance for student participation. We're not sure what the state will have us do with attendance at this point. To be in full transparency, we've received little guidance about attendance in particular. We feel like that will be coming to us soon as far as how they would like us to handle the attendance piece. As you can imagine, the tiered system of attendance is almost out the window. So, with that being said, we're waiting for that guidance to move forward, because there's, of course, a lot of law involved with attendance that has to be taken into consideration. It needs to be revisited. And so with that being said, we're looking forward to the guidance there.
Thank you. Second question. If I'm teaching American history face-to-face, will I also be responsible for the online delivery, or will one teacher be designated system-wide to deliver content for a particular subject or grade level?
That's a great question. So the truth of the matter is that we're going to be sending out a messenger, possibly our expectation send it out tomorrow, to ask for our parents to give us some indication by the 17th. That will be a point at which we will go to the responses that we have from our families. And at that point, we'll be better suited to make a decision about our staffing. It's difficult to talk about staffing until we know really how big this will be. I'm really looking at this virtual learning academy as a school, just for the sake of the fact that I have to staff it just like I would a school. And so if my numbers don't dictate that I need a full-time world history teacher, then I don't think it's sufficient that I supply one necessarily. So I think at this point, it's a very flexible situation, and I hope to draw it in a lot closer on the 17th.
I would just clarify with regard to the attendance issue. The State Department has affirmed that there's expectation for 180 days of instruction, and that with all students present, and a day is a minimum of 6.5 hours of instruction. So as I said before, we have to take roll. As Dr. Palmer said, we're not quite clear exactly how that will happen. We're waiting for some guidance on that, but there is an expectation that every student's engaged every day.
Absolutely.
Dr. Palmer, the 18% number you were talking about, it's if we have 18% of our parents decide that they want to do a full online with our students. At that point, you'll have to decide, like you said, that's something you're going to find out soon, I imagine. Those numbers are still developing.
Yes, sir.
At that point, you'll have to decide, okay, we're going to have a certain number of teachers that are doing online, most likely, and a certain number of teachers going to be doing in classroom. Have you thought about how you're going to do that process yet? Or who was going to be a classroom teacher versus an online teacher? Is it too early in the process to even ask that yet?
We are talking about it. It's to be honest, I don't feel comfortable necessarily laying out for you the entirety of those conversations because it's extensive. I will say that there are many, many different scenarios that we could run to fill those positions. And with that being said, to talk about one of the scenarios is that, we could have a very high number in high school and then have a not so high number in elementary, and it could even vary per grade level. And then those scenarios look entirely different. So with that being said, there might be situations where we do ask for a full-time online teachers, and in other grade levels, we simply don't because it's not needed.
Could you actually go back to that? One of the first slides you showed, it was about the parent survey.
Yes, sir.
Could you explain that slide a little bit more? Because it had 3 different columns of numbers, and it looked like it was weighted somehow, but I don't really know what I was looking at because I kind of confused.
I know the slide you're referring to. It's question number 11 of the survey, and I'll see if I can represent that. But basically what we asked parents to do in that particular question was to rank in order let me get to that slide, to rank in order what they were, their preference more or less. And so each one of those were weighted, as you said, and the highest rank, and it ranked it for us, top to bottom, was the traditional in-person learning. So for example, if a majority of our parents and families wanted the fully online delivery of lessons, that would of course been ranked number 1, and you would have seen these numbers flipped over. So you see by this color here, that, or these colors here, that this one ranked the highest. It ranked number 1 as the choice by our parents and families.
Dr. Palmer, I think it's important to clarify too that the 18% represents the number or the percentage of parents who wanted more information about the program. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that those are the parents and families who also provide us additional information, addresses, and other things that we use to send them that brochure that I referenced earlier.
The only last thing I was going to ask about is on there, it was displaying that they could still participate in sports, but what other activities? So say they're in band,
I'll show it to you.
other things. Is that still okay?
Yeah. So I'll scroll down. So these are the activities and different things that we see as potential options in the hybrid model. So of course, all of the career and technical education programs that are available within that student school, of course, are an option. In addition, some of the STEM classes, the humanities classes, and fine arts and JROTC. And you'll see clearly, if you know about how we've operated in the homeschool world for several years in the past, these are the same types of things, mostly, that the homeschool students have been able to participate in. So we've simply extended these options, just like we would for homeschool students, to our online students. And I say that just to, I guess, emphasize that for our schools, this is not entirely unfamiliar territory.
Any more questions for Dr. Palmer?
Dr. Palmer, will the students have the flexibility of being half-time in school and half-time in virtual academy?
I would, they will, if they exercise the hybrid option, they won't, I wouldn't want to call them half-time virtual, they would be full-time virtual, or they're going to be full-time students of their regular traditional school. Those two programs will run in parallel. But that being said, if they are a full-time virtual student, they can, and they do have the option of participating in some of these other courses that are offered at our school.
I'm thinking that if a student needed calculus, you may have trouble providing an online teacher for calculus. But would they be able to take that class at one of the high schools and then take their other classes online at the virtual academy?
That's a good question. It really depends on the accessibility, that student's ability to take that class online. So for example, in most cases, already we're offering several online courses. The Edgenuity program that we referenced before would be an option for those students to take if that particular course wasn't already offered at their home school. It'd be difficult to offer, and not impossible, but as it sits now, it'd be very difficult to have a student from one school take a course at a different school. I don't know how we work that out. And what we do right now currently, before COVID and those other things, is that if a student wanted to take an upper level course that was not offered at their home school, they would do that course virtually. They would do it through a program, do it through what used to be Florida Virtual, now Niswonger or some other place. Those options would still be available to those students. Either way.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My last question I have, and I'll leave it alone after that, but the information you put up on busing of if they plan to come on a bus or if they plan not to come on a bus, how different is that of what our numbers were like this year?
It is down. I have Mr. Miller sitting beside me. He says that number is down a little bit from what we've had in the past.
Okay, but I mean, it sounds like a huge number, but it's not a huge change. It's just a little different. Okay.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Anyone else?
So this is what will follow if we fall into yellow. They'll be using this also.
Actually, that's a good question, Mr. Robinson, and no, they won't. So what will happen is these programs will run in parallel. So the students who sign up for virtual school will have a set of teachers. They will be those students' teachers throughout. So there's not this back and forth and changing around and that kind of thing. We want to have that consistency for our students who decide to go the virtual route. And then for the students who come traditional, if they will have their teachers much the same way, the same teachers day in, day out. If they go to, AB, or if they go to, full remote or whatever, they'll still have their same teachers. And we felt like that was important for consistency, that they weren't going back and forth between programs and switching teachers all the time. We felt like educationally that would be detrimental to a child.
Completely agree. Now, what if, say, November, December, COVID-19 completely disappears and we can bring all of our kids back in January? These kids that signed up for this, are they allowed to come back the second semester?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Great questions from the board, by the way. Thank you all very much.
Okay. Anybody else have a question for Dr. Palmer about the information he shared? Okay, if not, then Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you for chairman comments and specifically the August board meeting.
Thank you. How does everyone feel about doing August the 13th at 4:30 for the workshop and 6:30 for the regular meeting? I'll silence my mic, and if anyone has any thoughts or has a problem, let me know.
Did you say August 13th again, 4:30 and 6:30?
Yes, sir. Everyone okay with that? Okay. That's what we will pencil in, and that's what we'll plan on then. And Dr. Cox, I'll turn it back over to you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hughes. So we move now to item 5 on the agenda, unfinished business, and I'm going to ask Mr. Hull to talk with the board about items A, B, C, and D under that. That has to do with the property issues, and I think there are a couple of requested actions this evening. So, Mr. Hull? You're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sound like a commercial, don't I? The first item there is on the Bluff City Middle School, which is now the Chris Laser property in Bluff City. If you will remember, that property takes up an entire city block. We sold that, and we left out of that sale one small corner because it did have a restriction on it for educational use only. I believe it's 0.36 of an acre. And as we've moved on with that, it's always been discussed, and I believe the intention that we would transfer that to Mr. Laser. And at this point, I'm asking you to authorize that transfer and authorize Mr. Hughes to sign the deed. There's a copy of that in the board packet, I believe. Just going ahead and quit claiming that to him. He's agreeable to that. That would mean it was his. If there were any legal complications, that would be his responsibility. And we'd like to go ahead and get that done. If you'll authorize that tonight, and we can get it signed. Any questions about that? Okay, hearing none. The next item is the Holston Ball Field property that you had authorized to sell. It was put up for bids by Chris Davis, and so that has been transferred to the successful bidder. The sales price was $51,000. So that one is done. Is everybody hearing me okay? The next item is the old Holston Institute property. We made several inquiries on that, and we really don't have any progress to report to you. It's much more complicated. It's a very, very involved situation. It's certainly pretty much full, and so really haven't made any progress on that. Hopefully we will hear something, get some more information to report back to you, but that one's been more difficult. And the Holston Valley Middle School property, we were preparing to move ahead with that. The county owns part of that property. The Board of Education owns part of that property. And we had already sent that over to Ms. Davis to put it out for bids. And as I was rechecking all of that information, I did go in and look at the deeds, sort of just to make sure that everything was in order. And unfortunately, I found out that everything was not in order. And those deeds were, one of them in particular was, I guess, totally erroneous would be the best description, as it set out the boundaries of the property. It's really so messed up that it's not discernible. Now, there's no question that we own that. We've been on it since the 30s. And talked to Mr. Street about that. And we asked the county surveyor, Mr. Montgomery, to go out and take a look at that. And he confirmed what I had thought, which was that was the way it was is just not workable. And his recommendation was that we do get a survey done on it, basically like we did on Bluff City Middle School. And, down through the years in dealing with those things, I just have found that's not unusual. Most of those properties go way, way back. That's almost 100 years, and things were not, surveys weren't as accurate. I guess lawyers weren't as accurate. And so finding those problems is not alarming, but it just needs to be squared away. So my recommendation, based upon everything I've told you, is that we do get a surveyor to do that. Frankly, the one we used before, he just did a tremendously thorough job on Bluff City Middle School, and it was a lot more involved. There were 9 different parcels that made up that whole entire school property. Here, I think there's just 3. So I don't anticipate it being as expensive or as involved, but he certainly has the ability and the inclination to dig into all of those deeds. And so that's going to be my recommendation, that we get him to do that. Let's see, is that all of those, Dr. Cox?
Yes.
Okay, any questions?
I would just say that I do concur with Mr. Hull that we should just go ahead and commission the survey just so that everything's clean.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hull. We move now to the new business section of the agenda. And so we will be asking the board for action on several of these. And the first up at 6A would be policy 5.3052, COVID-19 potential exposure guidelines for staff. And then we would seek a waiver of rules to adopt the policy on first reading. Just a little background. As you know, lots of information changing, and we're trying to work very hard to get ready for the opening of school in person. This is a policy that we are recommending. Several other school systems are also in the same boat that we're in, and so Mr. Hull has reviewed this, and I just asked him to comment just a little bit more specifically on some of the reasons for this.
Okay. I'm pulling it up. I think this is basically a policy that's been adopted and used by a number of different school systems. The primary benefit of it is that it would give us more flexibility in dealing with that. One of the points is that we would designate the schools as critical infrastructure workplaces, and that would give us more flexibility, not lock us into particular guidelines and rules and regulations. And doesn't say that we would take more chances or expose any of our workers to any greater risks, but it would give us the flexibility to respond to particular situations without being locked into specific guidelines. So based on that, I think this was developed there by the Lewis Thomason people for a lot of their school clients. And so it does look good to me, and I would recommend that we we do adopt that.
And I would just say, it really is about good practice for preserving the best health environment. So for that reason, we recommend it and would ask the board to consider it. And I would just ask if anybody had any questions that we would try to answer for you.
I guess my thing is where I work, we get temperature checks and everything every day. And I'm guessing this is just a guideline to go by. Are we doing more? Like, say, if we know they have been exposed to somebody that's had the virus, I would hope we still wouldn't let them come to school and teach knowing they've been around somebody.
This policy would say if you are that's a real important question. If you're entirely asymptomatic but you suspect an exposure, these are the cautions that would be put in place in that situation. Of course, if anybody is sick and is symptomatic, that's an entirely different scenario.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying, like, say if teacher's married and spouse came down with it, they're not symptomatic, so we're going to let them come on into our schools?
I think it would depend on the situation. We would certainly seek the advice of the health department, and when they have done the contact tracing. But this is primarily for people that have had an exposure, but that are themselves not symptomatic.
I understand completely what you're saying. I guess to me, is having kids in our schools, that worries me. That I know that one of our teachers can possibly come in contact with one of them, and we're going to know about it. But we're saying since that teacher's not showing symptoms, we're still going to send her to school to teach these kids. Why can't we allow so many days to see if they have symptoms before we let them in our school? And it's just like the traveling, if they travel to certain areas. I've had teachers come to me about this, say, what if I go here or go there? Do I have to quarantine for so many days before I can come back and teach? I guess my question is, to me, we need to do more if we know they've been around it or traveled to a hotspot.
Well, and just to jump on there with what Mr. Robinson's saying, this policy says they can come to work. I don't know if there's any way around it, or if, like, the things that Dr. Cox was saying is that we could evaluate things. But if this policy goes in, it says if you're asymptomatic, we're going to pre-screen and we're going to regular monitor, and you got to wear a mask, but you can come to work. So if we put this in place, I don't think this policy gives us a lot of guidelines to say, well, probably shouldn't, or other things. I'm sure that Dr. Cox has a lot more power than that and is able to do things. But as policy-wide, and as what the COVID guidance is, I don't see how we could tell somebody they can't come to work.
If we don't do something, how can we tell somebody they can't come to work? I'm not saying I agree or disagree with this, but if we don't have a policy, we have no leverage at all to say you've got to wear a mask or you've got to pre-screen.
And a lot of it really is just about helping to set expectations. And, if we want to encourage people that if they have been exposed to let us know that and just be transparent and upfront about this. So.
You can. We can table the policy. If we can table it, but again, I would say we don't have a policy in place that gives Dr. Cox the authority to quarantine someone. I don't think. I've looked and I can't find one right now. Unless they've got symptoms, if we got somebody who has symptoms, we could tell them they had to be quarantined. but without any symptoms, could we do that? Do we need another type of policy? So if we need to table this policy and work on another one before school starts, we could do that.
I'm okay with either one. I was just,
Right.
I mean, as we were talking about it, we're saying, well, this definitely lets people come to work. And, you know, it opens it and it doesn't really give any guidelines. So if we could, even if we put something in there as far as principal obligation or director obligation or something, not obligation, but rights, that they would be able to say no. But this doesn't do that. This just says you can come to work.
I think the discussion underscores the difficulty of the situation that we're in. And, you know, this has been, you know, researched and it's a policy that's recommended. I'm not going to present it as being a perfect solution, but it is some policy guidance.
Paul, how do you feel about tabling it and thinking about it till the August 13th meeting? And then there's some other questions that come up, like if we do hold somebody out of work, what if any compensation and those type of things? Do you have, how do you feel about that, Paul?
I personally think we need to table it and reconsider. To me, it's having students in there. We passed this tonight. This is going to be in the paper tomorrow online. Parents is going to see this, and their first thought's going to be like, well, if I see my kids, there's possible teachers there that's been around people with COVID. That scares me. To me, we need to fix this where if one of our teachers or one of our employees have been around somebody or traveled to a hotspot, we need to have a questionnaire. And to me personally, our principals don't need to be on our principals. This needs to be on somebody else. If they've traveled somewhere, been around somebody, we need to have a contact for them for a questionnaire to call somebody at the main office. They answer questions on the questionnaire. Then we decide if they're able to come back to work then. To me, this here says that we can't tell them that they can't come in because they've been around somebody. This says that they can come to work. It don't matter if they're right beside of them or seen them 10 minutes before they showed up to school. They can come in because of this right here.
Well, I'm not saying I disagree with any of that, but to Randall's point, what do we do now? If you table it and you wait till August 13th, then what have we done except we've made a headline from these comments now? So, I mean, what's the solution is my point, because we can talk about things a lot, but let's fix the problem as best we can. And I think this policy was meant to give an overview and give some more power to the director and address those problems. And you're making good points, Paul. I mean, I think everybody feels that way, but I think we need to talk about it and decide what we want to do instead of just putting it to the side and letting it sit there, because we're not doing anybody any favors if we do that.
I guess one thing that comes to my mind, and I agree, all of these are good points. Maybe we need to think about what is an exposure. And it's one thing if one of our employees' spouse has the COVID-19. It's another thing. For example, this is just something that happened recently. There was an employee at the bakery in Bristol, so they closed it down. Was everybody that was in there the week before, or have they all had an exposure? And if that's an exposure, we might not have enough employees, you know. And I don't know the answer to that, but this would allow them to come. And I think if a spouse has it, I think it gives us the right to say, no, you shouldn't come. But they would have a temperature taken. They would be monitored. They would have to wear a mask. And it seems to me that that's the federal guidance would allow that, but
And Mr. Hill, I would just say too that really is a difference of being critical infrastructure. So it's like, when schools are critical infrastructure, it's a slightly different situation than a bakery. So what we're expected to do is to have our schools open, and so I think it could reach a point where we don't have enough staff to operate the schools.
Well, if a nurse is treating a patient who has COVID, have they been exposed to it?
The health department talks about in terms of contact. And so a contact, and I would ask members of lead team, if I don't say this right, to please help me out here. But it is a duration of 10 minutes or more without any PPE, for personal protective equipment.
okay.
I completely understand what you're saying about the spouse and the bakery. I get that. That's why I'm saying we need a questionnaire so we can ask these people, how long was they around them? How close was you to them? Was you in direct contact? I get all that. And I understand that it may come down to us not having enough subs to fill them in. But where do we draw the line between safety of our kids and making sure we have teachers in their schools? That's my point. Where do we draw the line? You know what I'm saying? I would like to have something so when the teachers say they was around somebody, we can ask them a questionnaire and we got something to show that they said they was just by this person for 5 minutes and they was only within 10 feet of them. Or
there's nothing that precludes us from doing that. This policy would just give us a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, that's a good point, Paul. I guess my response would be, and I may be wrong about this, I'm open to any comments from anybody, but that's more of a procedural thing that implements the policy. The policy, I think, that's being proposed, and the reason it's being proposed to waive first reading is that gives, in my view of it, that gives Dr. Cox and the lead team the ability to do exactly what you're talking about, Mr. Robinson, which I mean, they're great points. But I think that gives them the ability to have procedures in place that are flexible, that they can change over time, versus right now we don't really have anything that covers it, which is understandable. I mean, we're dealing with a situation that none of us have ever seen, and hopefully none of our grandkids' kids will ever see. But so I agree with everything everybody's saying, but I don't think we're harming ourselves if we try to move this forward, because I think that gives all the people that we entrust every day with our kids the ability to be flexible.
And I would just say that's a perfect point, Mr. Spivey. Always when we develop policy, the procedures follow.
And Matthew, additionally, aren't you saying that we could still tweak it in August?
Muted.
Mr. Spivey, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I said I agree. I think we could always change our policies throughout time, but this would give a broad overview that it sounds like we need right now, and then we could always come back and change it. That's the hard thing, I think, as a board, especially in a unique situation like this, is trying to set a policy without dictating a procedure, because policies have a goal, but procedures can be flexible. And when we as a board get get into the minutia sometimes of, you know, you have to check this box and that one. That doesn't give the people that go to work for our kids every day the flexibility they need. So, but to answer your question, Mr. Hughes, yeah, I would say we could always go back and adopt a different policy, but I would hate to see us not do anything and not have any policy in place right now, and that leave our director, our lead staff feeling like they don't have that flexibility.
I agree with Mr. Spivey with, you know, one thing he's saying there, this policy sort of leads into procedure and procedures where you get into the minutia. But I don't think if I'm reading it right, and I'm not positive. So you tell me, the way I'm reading the policy, it is putting a procedure in place. And I don't think that the procedure that they put in place can actually go against the policy. So if the policy says, if you've been exposed to someone and you're not showing symptoms, these are the things you have to do, but you can come to work. And if that's what we want to say, then that's what we need to say. But it's not allowing the director, and it's not allowing the principals or anything else, because this says this is how it will go.
Then I hate to complicate it, but then the first thing you're going to be asked is, do I get paid? And if so, who, you know, does that have to be, do we have to change something to legally do that? Someone answer that.
And I would defer to Mr. Hull or anybody else, but I feel like in looking at this policy, part of the goal was to give more flexibility on a lot of those questions. Because, you know, the ADEA and all the different FMLA, all that's still going to apply to our employees during COVID, regardless of a pandemic. But declaring critical infrastructure is the main thing that we're doing with this policy. And that's what gives, that's the way I'm reading it. That's what gives the people that need to implement it the flexibility to answer all these kinds of questions.
I have a hypothetical. What if we exercise our flexibility and we have somebody that we think we need to make stay home? Then what? Even if we do have the authority, who answers those other questions? I mean, I realize we can come back and check it, tweak it, and I think we will have to. But I've already had some of these questions along these lines.
I guess I'm just kind of concerned that, and I mean, Mr. Spivey said it at first, and that's one of the things that they always, you know, preach of the TSBA things, is that the policy needs to be very broad and the procedure needs to be very narrow, and letting people know. I'm kind of thinking this one is causing us issues, or at least in my mind is causing me issues, is that this one did get very specific instead of going in the broad spectrum of saying we want to have a procedure and allow them the guidelines, the latitude to put a policy or a procedure into place that they can work with. This one actually goes into the minutia, and that's where I'm kind of getting tied up, I guess.
Couldn't we tweak this policy now to give an exception if there has to be an employee that we feel like we have to ask to be quarantined? Can't we just, I mean, if we need to pass it tonight, can't we go ahead and tweak it now, and if we need to tweak it again? Because there'll be things that we don't think of tonight that will come up.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And my question, I guess, in how we try to do that would be to Dr. Cox and any of the lead staff. But I would think that from a legal perspective and a board perspective, that our lead team has the authority I know people work on 12-month contracts, but they have the authority, if it's in the public health interest and they're consulting with the Sullivan County Health Department, to ask somebody to stay at home, even if it doesn't fit into, a neat box on this policy. I could be wrong, but I would certainly think that our lead team and our director and our principals would have that authority with an employee who's deemed. I read this in a different way, and maybe I'm missing the point, but I think that part of the TSBA recommendation is how we define critical infrastructure employees, because what you may end up getting is the exact opposite of what our concern is that an employee doesn't want to come to work and won't come to work because of different reasons, and they may be valid, and we'll deal with them, and I know our lead staff will, but this gives our lead team and our director more flexibility to make sure we're staffed and we don't have all our employees saying, well, I just can't come to work, I don't feel comfortable, because it's deeming the education to be critical infrastructure.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say, yeah, it is correct that, one of the things that this policy statement does, it does declare us as critical infrastructure. To the question, if you look, I think on line 20, that is addressed. If an employee has an exposure defined under the policy, and if that employee develops symptoms, the employee is asked to stay home and alert his supervisor. So there is an expectation in that. I don't know. We could probably spend a lot of time in the meeting. I'm not sure that we could wordsmith it here. I mean, we can try that if you want to, but I would just say we have a lot of other things to consider. If you want to table it, we could try to work on it some more. It's whatever your pleasure is. I just think that we don't have a policy statement, and this was one that's been recommended and has been considered by other school systems, and so we're not unique to that concern.
If I could just make one recommendation, I don't know if it's not perfect, of course, but if our goal is to make sure that if anyone is exposed or potentially is exposed has to tell their supervisor or the principal, then why can't we just make the policy that, and then the pre-screening, monitoring, masks, distancing, all those be a procedure that you create from the policy? Because if our goal really is to say, if you've been exposed, you have to tell us. And then you have the flexibility without coming to a monthly meeting, you could roll this tomorrow and then the next day, change it and adapt it to what you need. If what we're looking for is making sure the employees tell everybody, would that actually work?
Well, I was going to suggest that we make the statement that in lieu of a policy related to COVID-19 exposure guidelines, that we adopt this as a procedure which would authorize Dr. Cox to fulfill what you just said, Mark. But we don't have to have a policy necessarily, but it would be a school board approved procedure here in lieu of a policy, and it would allow him to do what needs to be done and also implement what Paul said about a screening, and even add an additional sentence there authorizing the superintendent to develop a survey for anyone who had traveled out of the area, if that's what the desire of the board is, so that you would have it in writing. And when you go to the doctor's office now, they ask you several screening questions. Have you traveled outside the area? Have you had a temperature? Have you had an unusual headache? Or I think there was 10 different things they asked me today, and marked it down. And they kept that as their official record to cover themselves. So if that's needed, we could do that, but we could adopt this as a procedure rather than a policy and just make that statement. And if we need a policy later, we can do the policy and add the procedure to it.
Yes, and once again, we're going to have thousands of students here 1st of August. We need to have something in place before our students come back.
Yeah, my only question, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, because Dr. Cox made a good point that we got a lot to consider, but would be, I guess, to Pat would be, if we do it that way, do you have any concerns about whether we've declared that we're critical infrastructure? I mean, that's a great point, Mark and Randall. I just want to make sure that we cover that base, because I think that is a piece that could be missed from the policy goal from the TSBA, is to try to deem critical infrastructure.
I think lines 23 and 24, Matthew, clarifies that the Homeland Security has defined us as a critical infrastructure. And it might be wise to make that in a statement when we do the policy and get it in the minutes too, that since we have been declared as a critical infrastructure, and in lieu of a policy, then we vote or we recommend this policy, this procedure here. And it gets it all down to where it's in our minutes of what we've done and publicly too, and gives Dr. Cox the authority to add to the procedure without having to worry about board approval. And he can add the survey that Paul was talking about, or the questionnaire that we're talking about, so that people could do something with that. But I think if you quarantine someone, you got an issue of pay. We don't have a legal leg to stand on. I don't believe Matthew, to pay someone if we quarantine them. I mean, we're not suspending them. You can't suspend somebody with pay if you tell them they got to stay home. So we might need to be thinking about a policy too of what if we do have to quarantine someone? Do we need a policy, and is it legal for us to pay someone when we put them in quarantine? I don't know the answer to that one, but I think it's something that we'd want to research.
I have one question, and it's really for Randall, because the way you're saying it, I just want to make sure that I'm on board, or make sure that I understand. If we call this a board-approved procedure, is the director still able to change it?
Yes.
The way that we say board-approved?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
You can, and if you feel better adding a sentence there that says, the director can make changes to the procedure as needed to accommodate, because we don't need a board meeting to talk about some of the details that's going to happen when someone comes in.
He needs more flexibility. That's why I was wanting to make sure we don't restrict that by saying board-approved procedure.
I think in the introduction, we can make that statement and make sure it goes in the minutes that way.
Pat, do you have any input on what Matthew and Randall said as far as the pay? You're on mute.
All of this is new ground. All of these are questions that I don't know that anybody necessarily knows the answer to, but I am inclined to begin with. I'd say I think a board approved procedure or procedure is a new invention, but maybe it's a good one, and I'm inclined to think that would work. And if we give Dr. Cox the authority to me, it's all about flexibility. That's where I started, and that's what we.
So if I may say, Ms. King has reminded me that we have a policy that is, of course, passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which is policy 5.3051, does spell out some of those issues that we're talking about paid sick leave. So I think that is covered already in policy.
Great. So I would be inclined to think that what Mr. Jones is suggesting would work, and obviously safety has to be our first consideration, and I think it always would be, and would give Dr. Cox the ability to deal with things as circumstances change in a totally changing and new environment. So I think we just have to do the best we can under the circumstances. So I can sign off on that.
Well, I appreciate the good discussion. As we all acknowledge that we're in uncharted waters. I mean, you can say it a lot of different ways, and appreciate all the thoughtfulness and for everybody's questions. So, if that is agreeable to the board, Mr. Jones, perhaps you could think about a way to make a motion on that that would operationalize your idea. Any other questions on item A, the COVID policy? I think the second one might be a little easier. That'd be policy draft 3.206. And I had asked Mr. Hull to add some consideration for community school facilities use. At present, I don't know of any school system in our region that is yet allowing facilities to be used by community groups. Now, there are some exceptions, I think, where cities may run rec leagues where that's happening. But Mr. Hull has provided some additional language for consideration. And again, this is policy. This is not procedure. Then we would have some procedures that would follow. But basically, what this provides for is that we would require a waiver statement for all participants that would protect the board, and that allows us to then develop those kind of procedures. So, Mr. Hull, you want to say anything about number 12 in that policy? You're on mute, Mr. Hull.
This is our existing policy, and we did add the number 12. Basically, I think the idea there is that we would not be able to monitor every use of the facility, assuming we allow it. And so the groups would have to adhere to appropriate measures and be in charge of making sure that they're observing social distancing requirements and those kinds of things. Obviously, that would call into question, how often we would be able to do that, but there probably are some circumstances where we could. So we added that new paragraph 12 basically for that purpose.
So what we're asking for again is an addition to the policy, and we would ask for a waiver of rules on this to adopt on first reading. That way we can begin the development. You can see we do have a draft of some waiver language. This is not a part of the policy, but that's just an example of what we might consider. So any questions about that?
Looking at this, I like everything about it. The waiver, the actual waiver form that's attached to it, it says that the Sullivan County Board of Education grants a use. Shouldn't it be department? Why? Because it looks like it's going to have to come to us to approve and to not approve things. I kind of thought it would be a Department of Education, meaning you would be the one to decide that.
I think it's probably a semantic issue. I don't know, Mr. Hull, that.
Because it goes pretty much into.
I actually think of those as the same. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
For some reason, I couldn't get the waiver to pull up, but I personally want to thank you because you don't know how many phone calls I'm getting on this right here. Right now, I want to know why they can't be on the fields, and my little girl won't know why she can't be in the gym. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. We want to have community groups use our facilities, but we want the important safeguards in place. So this will allow us to proceed with that. So thank you. Okay. The next on under new business is agreement to administer school nutrition program. Ms. Anderson, can you briefly tell us about that?
Yes, I'll be happy to. So this is our program agreement. It is a requirement each year. There have not been any changes made to this agreement from previous years, but in short, the agreement just states that I will operate the school nutrition program appropriately and that I will abide by all regulations and guidelines as set by the USDA and state agency. It is a requirement and it just needs to be approved prior to our first day of school.
Okay, so we're asking respectfully for the board to approve that. Any questions? Okay, moving on then. Mr. Miller, we're requesting the bus contract changes, and there are hard copies here for that. So, Mr. Miller, would you please address that?
Yes, I do have hard copies. If anybody needs a copy, I can bring over. You should have an email also that has the proposed changes. Really the only changes that are in the contract were changing the rate for these 5 buses that were coming up for bid. And then as we went through this year, we started experiencing problems with drivers just as other systems had, and we were doing some combining of routes and some different things to be sure that all of our routes did get run. And in talking with several people, it was decided that we wanted to kind of add a little bit of teeth to our contract to address some of these issues. So on page 8, that is where you'll see most of the changes within this contract. One person had asked about, what type of pay do our bus owners get during this type of crisis that we were in with Corona. And we already have that in the contract from several years ago, where it just simply states that for any reason, if we go less than a certain number of days, they get only a half daily rate. And then the next 2 sections are what we added to kind of put some teeth into our contract for if they cannot provide service for a route. We don't want them to continually put students on different buses or change buses from time to time. So within the contract, we've given them 2 days to be able to make some type of adjustments to this, understanding that there may be some instances where it needs to go longer, but we want them to know that we are watching and that if they don't get a driver back for the particular route, then we could start holding pay. And then section H is just simply that if they have exhausted all efforts and they cannot make a run, then of course they will not get paid for that. And we may have to assign that route to another contractor if they have drivers. And then the next change was simply the cost of living adjustment. For years, bus owners have gotten 3% at the end of the year if the cost of living, the CPI index was at a certain rate. And what I did, I went in and adjusted this, and on our first set of contracts here, these 5, the bus owner did agree that he thought the 1%, even though he didn't like it, but he understood my point of view when I told him teachers are not getting a 3% raise, but bus owners are yearly, and he understood that. So I simply changed that. Instead of a 3% minimum, it would be a 1% minimum if it falls below a certain amount. And then if it goes above 3, then it will be whatever it is, the 3, 4, or the 5 for the cost of living. And he felt that was more than fair, especially after I had the discussion with him about teacher and employee raises. So those are the big changes in the contract. And of course, in the packet that you received, we negotiated for these 5 buses a daily rate of $286.44, and that simply brings these 5 buses up to where 51 other buses are, and not all of those 51 are owned by this contractor. They're spread out between the 3 of them. Fuel escalation did remain the same at $3. So I felt like it was a good contract. We've added some teeth to it that should help protect us in the future, because I am worried about drivers this year. I think we're going to see all of our contractors struggling, and I saw on the news just a few moments ago, Kingsport City is already saying they are short drivers and asking for people to apply to drive a bus.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, and I appreciate those changes and for being responsive to the concerns that have been raised. So I'd ask if any board members have any questions or comments.
Yeah, I'd like to make a few comments. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Miller for doing a really good job here. There were some things that come to light during the opening of the middle school that he reacted to, and this and some places that we weren't getting buses into certain subdivisions and things like that. So thank you, Mr. Miller. And I'd looked at this prior to today, and I thought you did a really good job on it. But I have a question. Do you know how many routes are going to come up next year?
I do not know the exact number, but I can tell you this: it is one of the large years where it is approximately 30 routes that will be up.
And then can you remind everyone about when we will have the capabilities to, on a daily basis, to see how many routes are being ran?
We are currently sending TransFinder the information they requested, and they are in the process of building our current routes. And then our hope is, of course, that maybe come January, February, that we could go ahead and get the GPS feature going on those buses so that us, schools, everyone would have the ability to see where the bus is, when it starts, when it drops its last student off, those sorts of things.
Again, good job, and I really appreciate what you did during this since January.
Well, we want to thank the board for the purchasing TransFinder for us. It will be a great tool for our district.
Anyone else have a question or comment for Mr. Miller? Okay, if not, then we'll proceed. And Mr. Miller, you have the next two items, the student handbooks and the illustrative math. So why don't you just continue?
Okay. The student handbooks, we had a few meetings right before Corona hit. And in the meetings, there were not a lot of changes. It was mostly cleaning up some language in all three handbooks. The biggest changes seem to come around. We were talking about progress reports and report cards. Now that we're in a virtual world and parents have access 24/7 to student grades, we wanted to change the part about printing report cards and printing progress reports and just allow parents to go through the Power Teacher portal to see those grades, because they do have access at any time they want. However, we do recognize not all families do have internet access or the ability to do this. So we did provide a caveat for them to request from the school either a paper report card or a paper progress report. But for the most part, we have a huge number of our parents that do go online and they check their students' grades through the portal. So we felt that would just kind of bring us more up into where we should be with technology and our current programs. A couple of the other things that we changed was in alternative school language. We seem to have some problems with if a student missed a day, how those days were made up, and it had changed over time. So we felt like by adding the absentees will be made up on a one-for-one basis. So if they miss a day, they make up a day. If they miss two, they make up 2 days. Several years ago, we had a clause where if you missed one day, you had to make up 2 days. And students would often dig themselves in a hole for that. So we felt like a one-to-one was a much better solution. And now that we have the virtual school, one problem we've been seeing, and it's a result of one thing in particular, and that is the vaping. Our alternative schools have become very overcrowded. We try to run 12 to 15 students in an alternative school. After that, it really does not become effective. We've had students on waiting lists to get in. With the virtual school, what we have proposed is that 10 days or less, anything that a student would get 10 days or less, they would go and serve that time at one of our alternative schools that we have in the county. If they have anything over 10 days, we would like to enroll them in the virtual school. So that could include a variety of offenses. Mostly what we see over 10 days are students that have zero tolerance offenses that Dr. Cox can change from a year expulsion down to a certain number of days in an alternative school setting. So that would allow us to do that, and those students would pull that time in the virtual school type setting. And those, for the most part, those were our big changes in the student rights and responsibilities book.
Okay, so we will ask the board to approve this tonight. We need to have board approval to move forward into the school year. So does anyone have any questions for Mr. Miller?
No questions, and I just caught it, but you may want to update the letterhead on the it still has Mr. Green and Mr. Wells, so we need Mr. Robinson and Mr. Gilmore to replace those names. That was one thing that I saw.
Thank you.
Sorry to be picky.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay, anything else? Okay, I'll move on to the next item, and I'll try to move through this rather quickly. Miss Robin Jones, who is our 6 through 12 math specialist, I've asked her to join me on this, and what I'd like to do is just a short presentation about math in grades 6 through 8. And if you'll give me just a moment here to start presenting. Come on. Brent, is it presenting to you? No. All right, we get you the.
So then click on that screen. Go to present.
Entire screen.
Mm-hmm. Click on the screen. Then hit share.
Okay.
Then Google Chrome may not have permission.
Just
So
click it. Click down there. You're going to have to whatever right there. And just lock it.
Okay, I believe we have it fixed. New computer, and it had never gone through a couple things, so I had to make some setting changes, and we should be good now. Got it? Okay. Okay, and Ms. Jones, feel free to jump in anytime you'd like. Okay, in middle school math, we have kind of a grassroots movement that teachers are asking to take part in, and that is looking at some new options to explore in math in 6th through 8th grade. And the reason for this, our current math adoption cycle has been delayed until 22-23 school year, and that's actually the year that we'll start looking at a new curriculum. And then the new curriculum, and it's also going to have new standards within that, will not go into effect until 23-24. So that is still several years away. So that compounded with the adoption that we're currently in, that makes us using our current textbook for a period of 9 years. And for the past few years, we have struggled some in math. One of our last scores that we got from the state showed our district as a level 1 in math. And I'm not saying that it's entirely the textbook, but I think as long as we have been with this textbook and we've not seen great success, I think it is time to possibly look at some other options. And the state, since there is a long period of time using this book, they are allowing us to look at and experiment with some other curriculums if that's something that we want to do. And what I'm showing you right now is the Go Math series that we currently use in grades 6 through 8. And this is a review of that from Ed Reports. And as you can see here, the scores that it gets back, 12 out of 14, 8 out of 14, 12 out of 14, these should be all green. That's what we'd like to see, which shows that it's scoring as high as it possibly can. And Ed Reports is a third party that has no affiliation with any of these textbook companies. They simply review and post their results for districts to look at and use as they're considering curriculums. So most all districts across the nation do go to Ed Reports because it is very unbiased. But as again, you can see that our current textbook adoption, we would like to see all green on that. And we have a mixture of green and yellow here with the Go Math series. Here again, just a little bit further breakdown of 6th, 7th, and 8th. We have 2 areas of green and then everything else is yellow. And while the yellow scores are not terribly low, they are yellow, which means our current textbook only partially meets expectations in all those areas that you see yellow. It only meets or exceeds in 2 that you see green in. What's kind of happened since July 19, when we got our last set of scores and our district was a level 1 in numeracy, I had several conversations with some middle school principals after those scores came out, and they had been having conversations with teachers, and many teachers are substituting and supplementing our current text right now with other items, trying to bulk it up, make it more rigorous. So we do have a lot of teachers who are looking and asking for other resources. So last July, I did have 2 schools really want to dig a little bit deeper and start to experiment with a new curriculum. So we did have 2 schools try a program called Open Up Resources. And Open Up Resources, they use a curriculum called Illustrative Math. They simply bought it from Illustrative Math, put their name on it, put it into textbooks, developed some software, and then packaged it under their name. Illustrative Math sells their curriculum to several different companies, as a matter of fact. Blumpville Middle School and North Middle School had various teachers using this with great success, and it is a highly effective program, and I'll show you some results from it here in just a few moments. What we would like to do is be able to let schools that would like to try this year go ahead and use it, or they still have our current textbook, so they have an option of two sets of curriculum to use. However, I do think most of them will want to try the Illustrative Math, because we did have some small webinars with our teachers last spring that Ms. Jones led, working with the people from TNTP, the New Teacher Project, and they're the ones that help us with ELA. We brought them on board to kind of start talking with us about some new directions for math at that time. So our teachers have been getting a little bit of discussion and some webinars, some training with them, and they are very bought into illustrative math and what it provides. So our teachers were very excited about what they were seeing last spring, and it was simply a new way of approaching problems. What we would like to do this year is to, again, let those schools that would like try the illustrative math instead of our current textbook, and TNTP will be partnering with us to help those schools and provide support as needed through webinars. As soon as travel restrictions are lifted, they will be coming and doing some district walkthroughs in our buildings and giving our schools all the support that they need to make this a good transition. A few things about illustrative math, and some of these slides you'll probably recognize from the packet that I sent out. Kendall Hunt's illustrative math is a 2019 version. That's the one that we would like to look at. It offers everything that illustrative math has, and then what they have done, they have taken and packaged it in a nice way so that it comes with a variety of online resources and print material. And schools have the option to purchase both. And you can see from Ed Reports, again, that same company that reviewed our textbook, illustrative math hits all green in all areas. And actually, they scored at the top of all areas in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in focus and coherence, rigor, and the usability. And I'm going to ask Ms. Jones to jump in here in just a moment and maybe add a few comments about those three sections. But here's a quick summary of alignment. And here again, you can see it is green across the board. It's a very well-respected program across the country. Many states and many districts use it. And it shows because so many companies have bought the curriculum and, again, just kind of put their name, their twist on it to make it their own. But the bottom line is it still is illustrative math, no matter if it's in a red and white book as this one, or if it's in a purple and white book that another company sells. Ms. Jones, would you like to say just a few quick things here?
Yes. Thank you for the invitation. I just wanted to kind of explain this chart just a little bit. First of all, if you see gateways 1 and 2, I wanted to explain a little bit of what those are. Those focus on the questions of alignment to our state standards. Are the instructional materials aligned to the standard? Are all the standards present and taken with appropriate depth and quality to support our student learning? And so in those two areas, you can see illustrative math scores at the top of all those categories. And you don't often, when you go on Ed Reports, see these kinds of results. The third one, the usability, you only can get rated on usability if you score above average on the first two areas. But focus Gateway 3 is, are they user-friendly for students and educators so that a teacher can facilitate student learning and differentiate with students and build knowledge in the classroom? So this speaks to the quality of illustrative math material. Throughout this past school year, as Mr. Miller said, we did have 2 schools partially using this. One teacher I've worked with very closely at Bluntville Middle School, and we've seen great improvement in those students, and she can share more specifically. Mr. Miller has some comments you can see of hers later that she lets us see how our students have bought into this after they started. It is a different way of approaching math. It encourages productive struggle and discovery learning. And rather than the teacher standing up and teaching a skill and the students following, we rely more on the students to do the work and delve into the skill and understand how it occurs. And then we encourage our teachers. We've been training them on the 5 mathematical practices that have been developed by the NCTM that helps teachers do a better job of reaching our students and showing our students how we can learn better in the classroom. And as Mr. Miller said, the ed reports, they're the top. They use all kinds of educators and people from others areas to evaluate these materials. So they do a thorough job. This next slide says that in Gateway 1 and 2 both, that the instructional materials meet the expectations for at least 65% of class time on the major clusters of the grade, and they're coherent and consistent with standards. The 65% of class time, that means on the major clusters. So in each of our grade levels, 6, 7, and 8, you have sets of standards. And then the state does a blueprint on what they call the major focus. So in other words, let's say that in 6th grade, we study ratio proportion, we study geometry, we study probability and statistics and so forth. But maybe ratio and proportion is one of their major clusters. So we would want to focus over half of our time on those major clusters because that's what the Tennessee Blueprint asks us to do. So that's what the 65% of class time means on the major clusters. So on the next slide, Mr. Miller, this just goes on to Gateway 2 and 3. The same thing is that ed report says that illustrative math meets all these requirements at the maximum score. So that's, like I said, the teachers that have worked with this, and then we've been working with TNTP. They've been helping me lead our teachers in professional development. We expect that to continue, working with teachers on how to use this better in the classroom. Illustrative math is, as he said, available in print, and it's available fully online, so it can be used both in class and it can be used in virtual learning. If we have to use remote learning or students in the virtual learning academy, we would still be able to use it as well. So Mr. Miller, the last one, our alignment, this says that in all the standard clusters that the Tennessee, we're talking about the Tennessee standards for middle school math, that in each of our grades, all of our standards are aligned in illustrative math with the Tennessee curriculum. And I've delved into this research, Mr. Miller, and I've looked at it carefully. So to verify that all of this is held true and it covering everything. I have a document that actually matches every standard to everything illustrative math offers. Kendall Hunt is the publisher we're asking to use because Kendall Hunt offers the newest version of illustrative math. There are others, as Mr. Miller said, other companies that offer it, but Kendall Hunt offers the newest version of it. And that's why we've asked to use Kendall Hunt. And Mr. Miller, unless someone has a question.
Okay. Kind of our next steps, again, TNTP have already been involved with our teachers, doing some discussions and some trainings. What we'd like to do now is be able to let schools, if they wish to, dive deeper into this curriculum and try it within their schools. We think that we'll see great success with it because those 2 schools that did use it, even though we did not get to the point where we had any testing data from the state to use, they were able to use some of our programs that we already have and do some benchmarking. And one of the teachers, I'll show you just a quick statement here in a minute, she saw benchmarking scores continually go up throughout the year by using this. So she was very excited about how her students responded to it. The couple of things here that I'll just point out. She said students have the ability to do lessons either on computer with manipulatives, textbooks, do it totally online. So it is a good fit for us depending on what scenario we land in this year with school, whether we're 100% in all the time or we're 100% out or doing a blended model. This does give us lots of resources to fall back on. The current textbook we have, the textbook company is working to provide an extension of the contract so that we can keep using some of the online resources that it has. But Go Math does not have near the online resources that Illustrative Math offers. Under support, through the company, she had PLCs that met monthly and weekly. And I thought this one comment that she made, she said she never felt like she was on her own with what she was doing with her students. She even made contact with Open Up, and they actually helped her provide slides for each lesson as she went through this, and that she was able to share with other teachers. So the companies are very good to work with. The one comment that I really kind of liked from her was here in evidence. And it's that, she saw scores improve on all of her tests. She gave unit tests from Performance Matters, and that's the benchmarking program that we purchased last year. And she saw many of her students go from one level to another. And that she just thought was very exciting to see for no longer than she was even using the program. And does anyone have any questions? I know that's a lot to throw at you in such a short time period about illustrative math.
I guess I have two questions, actually.
Okay.
The first one being, I think you actually answered my first one. That was, we don't have any data that shows it improved because we had the COVID and basically had to shut all the classes down. So we really didn't get a lot of data back.
All we had was the Performance Matters benchmark that we purchased, and we control the testing on that. So the way that works, teachers can create their own small assignments for daily or weekly assessments, but as a district, Ms. Jones and myself and maybe even a few other teachers will work to create these benchmarks at certain stages through the year. So that's where Ms. Ferry really saw some increases with her students that we didn't see at other schools.
Okay. And I guess the second question would be, what is the cost?
The way this program is laid out, and Ms. Jones, you jump in here at any time, I believe it was $27 per student is what schools can purchase this for. And they have an option of using title funds if they wish to go this way, but that gets them print materials and digital materials. So it's a very cost-effective program compared to textbooks that are going right now in excess of $100 per student.
Yes, Mr. Arson, they're actually consumable textbooks, and they come in module units. And they are the cheapest. I mean, you know what a college textbook costs. So the fact that we get these for $26 a student, and the teacher materials were less than $100 for a whole year's worth of teacher materials. So it is much more cost effective, and Kindle Hunt offers it 100% free online. So like you can see every teacher edition online, every student edition online as well, with the proper logins and so forth. But it's free material online. So it's very cost effective for what we've been looking at paying for math books.
Okay. And we say there was 2 schools that started trying it this year, but we're going to expand it out to all of them. Are we going to be able to, does each school have to do that as far as buying their own stuff, or is it something that district does in general for that?
Since we're in the middle of an adoption, we still have the Go Math series, so that's available for schools to use. And then for those that would like to try illustrative math, they have title funds that they can use. Where we're in the middle of an adoption, we don't have funds available to actually assist them in purchasing anything.
Okay. It just seems like, and I know you're definitely doing it, because when you're a 1, you have to have a plan of how you're going to recover from that and what we're going to do better. It just seems like if it's something that we can use to do better, it would be something we would just go forward with. But I understand the middle of the cycle too. So yeah, trying to figure out the cost overall.
And the ELA textbook adoption last year was enormous, and we knew that was coming. And the state is telling us that math will be no exception. That there will be a significant increase in the curriculums and textbooks for the math adoption, just like ELA.
One thing, Mr. Arson, I'll just add quickly is illustrative math helps us helps our students learn a new way of thinking because it's discovery learning. So what we're hoping to do with this and through the professional development is transition our teachers and our students into this new type. Don't give me 20 math problems to do. Help me discover, help me understand how this process takes place instead of working through a formula. So until we do get to the next state adoption, if we can build this into some of our schools and help our teachers and our students, try some different things, our goal is then by the time we do an adoption and have to spend that money, we'll have had enough experience with it that we'll be better at it, if that makes sense.
And illustrative math, it's for the most part, it's kind of an extension of the Eureka math that the elementaries, many of them were using this year. It teaches in much the same format.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was informative. I just curious how, what we were doing as far as could we not just move into it? But again, mid-cycle and the money and everything else makes it that answer. But with not getting any results back, it's kind of hard to force something or mandate it if you don't really know a positive that it's. So just curious. Thank you.
Exactly.
Mr. Miller, is not the 9 years, I saw that in the report. This is an extension from 6 years to 9 years that we'll be using our old set in this new program. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. The current adoption, this is our 6th year in it, and then the state has come up and they had originally just pushed the adoption out 2 years, and now it has been pushed out 3 years because they're not only changing a few things with the standards, they're actually rewriting all of the math standards. It's my understanding for K-12. So with that enormous task, they've added an additional year in. So that puts us having a 9-year cycle.
Aligned with the Common Core standards.
Yes, ma'am. Tennessee Common Core standards.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
I went to their website and they claim that they move at a faster pace. Has there been any issues with the schools that were experimenting with it, that the pace was too fast? Or
Miss Jones, I did not hear anything from teachers. I know students at the beginning struggled because it is looking at the curriculum a different way. And one big change, illustrative math takes over other math programs. They start out with geometry. And geometry is a very hard concept for middle school students. That falls at the end of 6th, 7th, and 8th grades where you start seeing most of that. They bring it to the forefront and actually start the year out with it and embed it with other skills so that throughout the year, they see these geometric concepts coming into everything they do. So it is a tougher curriculum. And once the students in Miss Ferry's class, I know this was one comment she made, once they become familiar with the curriculum and how it works, they got much better. And Miss Jones, is that what you saw also?
Yes, I sat in her class many times because we were trying to work through this curriculum, and she said it took about the first 3 units for students to catch on and to see how well it worked and to see how different it was. She said by unit 4, they were coming into her classroom ready, begging her to move forward. I mean, they adapted to it. Yes, it is tough. She commented, you have to do a lesson a day if you want to stay on pace. And that is tough until you get the students, thinking this way. COVID kind of messed us up. We didn't finish because we went out before the end of the school year. So that kind of throws a kink in for us to say, how well she did get everything covered. But as y'all know, it's hard to get it covered anyway, our math concepts, but we just have to continue that spiral review all the time. But yes, it is a fast-paced curriculum. It does have high expectations for our students. I would agree with that.
With the way it was introduced, how much harder was it on the teacher? I know there was a lot of help and a lot of people were going on, but was it a lot more workload on the teacher, or was it Okay.
Initially, yes. Initially, it will take some work with the teacher. We also had one high school Algebra 1 teacher at Sullivan South that tried it in Algebra 1. And she said at first it was a lot more work, but once she developed and understood, and got into it, it worked better. And I observed her class several times, and she had a difficult algebra class as far as them being able to catch on to concepts. And we saw some big changes. Actually, we took our T&T people there to observe her classroom because of the big changes the Algebra 1 students made. So it goes all the way. We can take it 6 through 12. They have that curriculum available. So she worked with it well too.
And it's like all curriculums that first year, teachers do have a harder time that first year learning everything.
Yeah, it is a different way. I mean, I've taught a long time, and this is a different way of approaching it. It will take some work on our part helping our teachers.
Thank you both for all the hard work. I know you did a good job on it, so I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You had to do a lesson a day with this. What if all your students don't understand that one lesson from, say, the day before? Are you saying you can't go over that lesson again on the next day?
Oh, no. No. Every teacher would have to pace their own students. I'm saying if you kept on their schedule, obviously books are written to do a lesson a day, but that's something we would work with our teachers. Now, every school, every classroom's different. So no, you don't have to. We would all have to pace our students the best we could. There is a lot of room for differentiation in this program too, though, so we can help all our types of students.
Thank you on that. I know I talked to some teachers before, and it was a lesson a day, and you had to get it done. You couldn't go over one lesson 2 days in a row because of how fast paced everything was. So I was worried about that.
Yes, I understand.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Miller and Ms. Jones. Appreciate it. So we will be asking the board to approve this evening in the business meeting. So thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is item G, and that is the 2020-2021 school calendar. So I'll try to summarize this briefly. This evening, we are asking for the board to consider adjusting the start date for the beginning of school. And as you know, we were not able to host in-person graduations. Dr. Palmer led the effort with our high school principals and student focus groups. That was one of the things that our students told us that they really wanted. We were fortunately able to give them the Bristol Motor Speedway Cross the Finish Line experience, which was immensely popular. And schools did various other things, but we did have a strong will for an in-person graduation. And what we said at the time was that we felt like the latest that we could do that, abutting to the new school year, would be to offer those experiences on the 31st of July and August 1st. And so scheduled school start is August the 3rd. The high school principals in discussion asked that we would consider giving a little bit of a break in between the graduation dates and the start of school. So this evening, we're asking the board to approve a 2-day change in the calendar so that the start date would be August the 5th. And again, this is requested by the high school principals. And I have Mr. Hare, I know couldn't be here, nor could Mr. Foster. I think Mr. Hare has sent the board his comments. Mr. Foster asked me to comment for him that he supports this. But we do have Dr. Davis and Mr. Tate here, and I'm going to ask them to comment just based on the conversations that we had. So, Mr. Tate, would you mind to go first and make your comments and then followed by Dr. Davis?
Absolutely. And can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you all for your time, and I appreciate your attention to this. One of the fears that we have, if this was 2017 or 2018 and we were trying to have a graduation and start school 2 days later, it would be a tough situation. But add to that is COVID-19 restrictions. So we're going to be spending, I think, a good part of our week with our teachers the week before school starts, in our teacher in-service week, basically going over the logistics of how we're going to get kids moving through the hallways, how we're going to do lunches, how we're going to do the beginning of school, after school. So, spending a lot of time on that during that week, and then also trying to focus on executing a graduation on the 1st, or 31st, Friday or Saturday, will be pretty tough. And what we're asking to be able to do is, prepare for our graduation, while we're also doing those things, but also have a couple of days when we come back on Monday and Tuesday to be able to change gears away from, the 2019-20 school year and shift into the new school year and really get ready for that. And, for those staff members that are putting a lot of effort into the graduation ceremony, which it is a very big ceremony for all of us, it'll be a situation where, if they start on Monday with their teacher work sessions and they work the entire week, they work on Saturday at graduation, they take one day off Sunday, then they've got 5 straight days of beginning of school. That's a pretty tough opening for our staff. And so, we feel like it'd be nice to be able to give those teachers a couple of days pause, just to get a breath and be able to get their focus back on the start of school. Dr. Davis, you have any?
Yeah, sure. Just to follow up on what Josh said, and he just articulated everything that we've talked about at length. But just one other thing, as a teacher, those 2 days are extremely important, between that week of coming back, getting into the grind of school, having meetings, the professional development, all the things that we need them to be focused on. And then on top of that, this year we're throwing in a graduation, and for our staff, they're there all day. We will have graduation practice, the morning of those graduations. For a lot of our folks, they just don't go home. And so Saturday from daylight until, in North's case, graduating at 8:00 till, close to midnight or after, they're going to be on campus. And we really feel like they need a couple of days to reset, to rejuvenate, and to be ready for our students, excited and ready to start a new school year a couple of days later. So that's what we're asking. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I would just say that what I failed to mention before was we announced at the time that we would make a decision by July the 20th as to whether or not we're able to have the graduation. But we feel like that we need to have a decision if we're going to have a calendar changed for some of the reasons we talked about before. Parents just need to plan. And so Ms. Buckles has prepared some scenarios for possible alteration for the calendar, and there are 4 different ones. And what I'm recommending to you this evening is that we would exercise, the board would approve option 4, that the start date would be the August 5th date. So with that, I will stop and then entertain comments or questions from members of the board.
I have one question about the schedule, and this is just a very curious question. I'd really like to hear what the principals or all the principals that are on would tell me. If we start on the 5th, and then immediately the next day is the 6th, the election day, and the teachers aren't there, is that a good thing, or is that kind of crazy where we should just start after the elections? I'm just not sure if it would be a first day and then taking the next day off is a benefit, or if that's a detriment.
Well, we did talk about that, and I think it could be either, depending on how you look at it. But given all of the complexities that we're dealing with, it might be good to have a day after the first day to make some potential adjustments. So that was one of the things that we talked about. Mr. Tate, Dr. Davis, or Ms. Buckles.
I don't know if I heard Mr. Ireson correctly, but the teachers would be on campuses August the 6th, just not students. So that would be an in-service day for teachers.
Yeah,
it just wouldn't be a student day.
Right. And I understand that. And I guess that is my question is that a benefit or is that a bad thing? As a teacher, is it good to say, I've got this first day and we're going to walk through it, and then the next day have the chance to sit back and regroup and say this worked and this didn't? Or is it really not a benefit to say, if they're not going to be here 2 days in a row, then why would we do it?
Dr. Davis, I think you were trying to say something.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
No, to Mr. Iverson's point, exactly. And I think it's Dr. Cox, what you had mentioned. A lot of times a day after the first day is a really good thing in that, especially with everything that's going on, if we get them in there, if we happen to be in yellow and we're having to impose some of these more stricter, guidelines, processes, procedures, it gives us a day to come back to say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, those kinds of things. And the day certainly is not going to hurt in terms of our teachers and their planning, and then just trying to work through all of this stuff that we just don't know what's going to happen until we get kids and adults in the building and try some of these processes and procedures out.
I don't think you're going to see good attendance on that Wednesday. If you start on Wednesday, I think that elementary students will stay home. I think high school students will stay home and wait till the following Monday. I don't support even changing the schedule, especially changing it to Wednesday. I would support a half a day on Monday, early dismissal for the students. And I realize the changes that you have to make when you do graduation, but I hate to make changes for parents at this stage of the game. We've had the calendar approved for several months now, and we're making all kinds of other changes, and we're saying we may be green, we may be yellow, we may be red. And then now we're talking about making changes even more so. But I support doing a half a day on Monday. But as far as changing it to Wednesday, I'm with Mr. Iverson. I think the attendance is going to not be good if we do that, because we're going to be closed on Friday or Thursday for the election, and people aren't going to show up. And you can't really make adjustments in your schedules if the students aren't there. We used to call them no-shows. You had to figure out who was not there. And if we start school on Wednesday and then tell the kids not to come on Thursday, the attendance that first day will not be anywhere near 80%, in my opinion.
Any other questions or comments?
How much of an impact on the rest of the calendar would this request make? And I mean, I think I know the answer, but I just haven't heard anybody say it.
Well, Ms. Buckles has worked out how that could work. I mean, you have to have 180 instructional days, and so it would require other adjustments, and so she's kind of laid those out. I'll just kind of in option 4. Students would start on the 5th instead of the 3rd. August 3rd would become an administrative day for staff, and those students would attend. August 4th would become an in-service day for staff, and no students would attend. January 4th, in-service would become a regular student day. February 8th, parent-teacher conference would become a regular attendance day, and there would not be a scheduled parent-teacher conference for the second term. Any parent conferences would be scheduled, but going back to an earlier conversation, with the online grading, what we've seen over time is a significant decline in participation in the second semester conferences. So, Ms. Buckles, you might want to add some more comments to that.
No, that does cover scenario number 4. If he was referencing the half day, really that doesn't change anything other than we would need to notify parents that students would be coming home a half a day instead of a full day on that Monday, August the 3rd.
And we're allowed, if I'm correct, 3 half days. This would be the 3rd. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have one scheduled for the day, the last day before the Christmas holiday break, the last day of school, and then this would be the 3rd scheduled one if we did a half a day, and that's how many we're allowed by law to schedule.
Aren't we required by law to have 2 scheduled parent conference days, one first semester, one second?
We are required by law to have one. No, we're only required by law to have one, And prior to the days when I started building the calendar, we only had one, and it was always in the fall. And then I started taking one of the optional days that you can use as an admin day and scheduling the second one for the spring. But by law, we only have to have one per year.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments?
I don't want to dismiss the concerns of the principals, but we've missed a lot of instructional time, and I kind of concur with Mr. Jones on this. I think the quicker we get students back in the building and learning, the better. That's just.
Okay. All right. If there are no more comments on calendar, the final issue is the ESSER funding. This is the better known as the CARES Act, and just wanted to very, very briefly share with the board what we've asked for. We have been approved for this, and I will say we do have the flexibility to change this as we need. We had a very tight time window. As I mentioned before, our lead team has worked extraordinarily hard. This is one of the tasks that was thrown at us with a very minimal window to get this in, but there is flexibility in there. So the action that we need from the board this evening is to accept this federal grant. So I'm going to turn it over to the lead team, and they're going to quickly take you through it.
Hi. So the enrollment coordinator is a position that we're looking at that will assist in the operational duties of the virtual learning program. It's essential that we have some help and some leadership and be able to help handle everything that's going to be coming into this program, the application process, the decision processes, all the teacher training. There's so many aspects to this. As I said before, we're basically starting a school virtually. We usually have principals and assistant principals and all sorts of things. And so we're not asking for that. We're just asking for a coordinator in this case to help with all the logistics of this program. So that's what the enrollment coordinator would be for.
This second part here is that we would have instructional tech coaches. Many systems already have these. We are not do not have these at the present time, but they would be 3 folks that we could really have to help train our teachers in how to deliver good online learning, how to create good online learning. Good online learning modules and projects for them to do. We would have 3 of those system-wide. We would also provide stipends for kind of a teacher leader instructional tech coach within the building that would be kind of that go-to person that would take instruction from those 3 coaches, take that into that building, and be able to support teachers in the implementation of those online learning modules and projects. Karen, don't we already have tech coaches within each school? Our tech coaches that we have in each school are more hardware, software, device management people. These are not as much instructional technology people in terms of implementing online curriculum and project-based learning digitally.
So this position is actually grant coordinator. This person would actually help us to order all of the materials and supplies, which you'll see in just a minute how much technology we're looking at. They'll do all the tracking of devices as far as when we deploy those out to schools. They'll do all of the inventory management.
So this would be salaried positions for 3 additional three coaches, online virtual learning coaches, teaching coaches.
Yes, it would be. Yes, it would be.
And then stipends for each school. A person in each school.
Yes, stipend for each instructional.
Who's already employed.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I jumped the gun. I didn't know there was a question. The grant coordinator position is a position that would help us to do all the inventory tracking of devices that we're going to purchase and deploy to schools. They'll help us do all the ordering and all of the anticipated reporting that we'll have to do with the CARES grant. Anytime you have a federal grant of this magnitude, there is a lot of paperwork that goes with that, and this person is just going to help us keep that coordinated and also help us as we have to coordinate with New Hope Academy, which is a non-public school, which we have to grant. So that's what this position is. Brent, Robin, or Billy?
We're getting there. Excuse us just for a second. So this is.
You got it, or you want me to?
I apologize. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, good. So these substitutes are for those times when we are going to plan to bring out our math teachers and some of our ELA teachers for training in the new curriculum. It's very important that we have these we have an ability to put these substitutes in the places for those students, so the students don't lose that instructional time. They can try our best to keep things going with our substitutes, and that we have time for our teachers in math and ELA to learn the new curriculum that's being implemented, as well as the curriculum that you heard from Mr. Miller a little bit earlier that we're instituting with the illustrative math. They're two great big pieces, and if we don't have the training time course with the teachers to get them familiar with this new curriculum, it's going to be at the detriment of our students. So that's what the substitute amount there is for, is to provide us the appropriate training time to familiarize our teachers with the new curriculums that we're implementing this year. It's not 100% training. It's also for collaboration as well. I think that's an important aspect of it, that our teachers can get together and coordinate their efforts with our students. So that's what that's for.
So this money is actually, we've reserved, we don't know how much we'll need and exactly what we need it for, but we do know that we are required for special populations, which include special ed, ELL, and homeless, to ascertain if they've regressed because of the COVID closure that occurred March through May. And so we've reserved money so that if we have students who have regressed, we can provide those compensatory services. Again, we're not exactly sure. That could be truly individual student by student as to what service they need. So we've reserved this amount of money just as a set aside to take care of that if we need that. And we won't be really able to know that till we get kids back in our building and can see how they've done with the closure.
Okay, it's me again. So benchmark assessment, we did add some funds to the benchmark program that we purchased last year. In the years past, or last year when we added this program, we did not include 12th grade, and we didn't include first grade. We found that to be very unfortunate, and we felt like we could do a lot more if we had those two grades added in understanding where our students had what their performance levels really were in the 11th grade, and to see the results of that in the 12th grade, so we could really do a much better job of tracking the results of all of our hard work. So that first part of the benchmark assessment, that line item is for the addition of those two grade levels. So the ZERN, which is the digital access to math, as you've heard about already, we're adding these new math programs. The ZERN piece is the online platform for the math program. And the reason why that's important is because obviously we're not sure how much time we're going to spend out of school virtually versus in school. So having that platform available to our students could be a really big deal because on that platform is where the math textbook, the materials, and everything lives for that math text and for that curriculum. As it says, it's the digital access to all things math that we're going to be teaching students. So that could become a huge deal. We look forward to having that available to our students. Karen, if I'll just go ahead and do the LMS, the learning management system as well, since I'm going. So if you skip down to the fourth item there, the vendor Schoology, and an LMS is a learning management system. A similar program to Schoology is Google Classroom. We put together several teachers to speak to them about what their thoughts were about adopting a new, more robust learning management system. It's something I felt like personally that we've needed for years. Ms. Nave and I have talked about this for many years. And after putting together a group of teachers and speaking to them about what they felt like was a good fit for our school system, they picked Schoology. We worked on negotiating prices with the company and getting it to where you see today, which is a great deal for a 2-year contract in this program. This learning management system is the best way to describe it. If you're not familiar with Google Classroom, which this is going to be much better, much bigger, it has a lot more capability. It's going to make student learning and student management of learning a lot easier. But if you're not familiar with Google Classroom and what an LMS really is, it's kind of like a suitcase. It's the singular place that the students and the teachers can go to access all the programs. So for my little girl who would get on Prodigy and who would try to use iExcel and try to use every time she was assigned an assignment and had to log into one of these other programs, she had to have another username and password for this, So for my 9-year-old, navigating in the online environment was very difficult. She had a hard time with all the buttons and all the passwords. A learning management system puts it all in one place, and it's a single sign-on area for our students. So it's a very powerful thing moving forward for our students and for our families.
Very quickly, ClearPass, which is a system that will allow us to have people authenticate before they get on our network. It helps our network be more secure. A lot of times during this, when people didn't have internet access, they would come to our buildings, sit in our parking lots, and use our internet. And that opens us up to obviously bad things that could happen. Data could be accessed, different things like that. This will help us. Also, what we can do is we can set up a separate guest network that, again, protects anyone from getting to our data. And it also helps us to, say, during testing, we can shut that network down or throttle it to where it's lower and give our other network inside that all our devices are connected to more robust access to our internet, and it won't slow things down. So that's something we're very excited about.
The instructional supply budget is for the virtual academy that we're building. Quite frankly, as we've begun to build this thing out, we're finding that there's a lot of other costs that are associated with this, anywhere from paper costs to possibly other things that we're going to have to use to provide packets for students and other things for courses that really don't fit as well in the virtual environment. So we felt like it was very important to provide some finances there so as to not have to pull from a different budget for unexpected costs. And so that's what that amount is for. That's going to hopefully take care of supplying virtual education to students no matter what their situation is.
Obviously, one of the huge challenges that we faced when we had to close for COVID was the fact that we had students who did not have devices. We had not issued those because we have never had the money to be able to go one-to-one. So we're very excited to be able to have enough money that we can purchase devices all the way from K to 12. And our little folks in K and 1 will be using Chromebooks that flip. so they can write on them, and everything is like a touch screen. So we're very excited for that basically K through 12, every student would be able to have access to a Chromebook. The other thing that was very challenging during that time was basically our students being able to access the internet. So we have built in also money for that, to where we can buy wireless hotspots. Those can be checked out and used so that our students would be able to access the internet while they are away, and also have a device.
So I'll take this one, but I do want to back up and say, because I don't know that we did a good job of laying out what our charge was from the state when we were given this grant money, and it was to prepare for this school year, whether if we were going to be in school full-time, online full-time, some type of hybrid. So that's why you see such a heavy technology focus, and really trying to beef up that side so that if we have to go part or full-time, we're taken care of, as well as adding to some curriculum so that we have that in schools as well. So we've set aside some money for PPE items. Obviously, that's gloves, masks, cleaning supplies, that sort of thing. But we've set that amount aside. I know Charlie's also setting some others aside within his actual budget, but we did set aside some money to buy PPE items for students and staff.
This next piece is mental health counselors. One of the things that I think that if you talk to any teacher or principal during this time, is they're concerned for their children being at home. Some of those kids never logged on to a class, so they were very concerned about them. We've had kids who have been isolated. We don't know what they might have experienced. And so what we wanted to do was to provide mental health counselors for our elementary schools. Right now we have full-time counselors from Frontier Health in our high schools. In our middle schools, we have one Frontier Health counselor per 2 middle schools, and these six system-wide Frontier mental health counselors would be able to be split 1 per 2 elementary schools, so that we would have some social emotional support for our students as they come back to us.
This group, TNTP, is a group we've consulted with for several years, and they have just done an incredible job with our school system and with our teachers. And one of the primary roles is to help us to work with our teachers to get the best out of them. Priorities for TNTP is that they support teachers as they learn and use new English language arts curriculum, and as they grow, and as those teachers grow and as they get better, we'll continue to support teachers in the math instruction and the curriculum that Mr. Miller mentioned a little earlier. They will help us to spiral the professional learning to help all teachers grow continuously as we dive deeper into the student learning, help us to chart the standards not taught in the spring, so that we can make plans to bring back together those skills for our students to help move them forward. And then finally, to help teachers use student benchmark data to meet the needs of the students in small groups, which will be very important to bringing students up to grade level where they need to be. So very important group of people to work with, and we've been very proud of our relationship with them in the past. We know that will continue into the future.
The next 3 tabs pertain to food service, and these are more of a reimbursement purpose for me for unplanned expenditures. First tab you see here is cafeteria personnel. That's just some additional for cafeteria personnel that we don't normally use like we did during our emergency feedings and as we're doing now during our summer feedings. The second tab is for food service transportation. That was for the expenses of buses that we used when we were delivering meals during our emergency feeding. That is not a normal expenditure for us. And then the third tab is for food supplies, for additional funds that we would have spent on food supplies that we wouldn't have otherwise if it had not been for our emergency feeding and our current summer feeding, since we are having to do a lot of to-go and prepackaged items, which are typically more expensive.
Okay, and the last amount of money that we have designated in the CARES grant is for New Hope Academy, which is a private school that Angie mentioned earlier. We did reach out to the private schools in Sullivan County to see those who would want to participate, and New Hope did respond back to us. So they received an allocation based on their enrollment. And with those funds, they planned on making similar purchases to our district. They have equipment designated. They're going to have a communication platform that they'll provide to their students as well. So I, along with the CARES grant coordinator, will be working with them throughout the next 2 years to monitor their funds and ensure that the allocation is spent appropriately.
Okay, as you can see, this was a great deal of work in a short time frame to put this grant together. I'm very appreciative of members of the lead team for their work, and Ms. Buckles led that, and so I want to say again thank you, and just reiterate that the guidance that we got from our state was that we had to use these funds to prepare for the opening of school in these circumstances. So we didn't have the flexibility to spend on anything except for that. So that's why the federal money came and passed through to the states. So we didn't have the ability, not that we wanted it, but I did get a question: can you not just supplant the regular budget? That's not what the purpose of this funding is for. This is to help us be successful given the circumstances that we have with COVID-19. So again, thank you very much. Our requested action from the board tonight will be to accept this. Our grant has been approved by the state. So thank you all very much for your attention. Do you have any questions about the ESSER or CARES Act funding?
What was the total amount?
2.1 million was the total amount of the grant.
I have a question about the full-time positions. It showed there was 4 different full-time positions that the grant will be used for. Did those positions disappear after a year? What happened to those 4 people?
So the grant funding is for a period of 1 year. For example, the instructional technology coaches would be to get us started. It would be something that gives us a trial that if we saw value in those, and we would seek a way to continue those through. But it would be with the understanding that these are grant funded. Obviously, if we have, say, teachers go into that, it quite possibly could be a 1 year assignment. Then they would rotate back into the classroom if that were the case. But that is true. Anytime you have a grant funded position, that particular funding, unless it's renewed, is not available for the next year.
Is it a possibility that our teachers will take these positions? Is that what you said?
It is possible that we could have some teachers that are very skilled and have expertise in delivering digital content that would become resources for other teachers, and then they would fill that in the event that we would not be able to sustain those in the future year. Then those teachers, of course, they would go back as a classroom teacher potentially. So,
but
yes.
we would fill those positions if they went into this instructional role. We would have to fill a new position.
Yes,
is that correct?
That's right.
Now, are the fringe benefits and insurance and everything covered by the salaries that were listed there in the chart?
They are. They've been figured in.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, with that, Mr. Chairman, that is the conclusion of the work session items. I might suggest a break of some minutes before we would reconvene.
Dr. Cox, what about the pre-K quality grant? Is that on the agenda? That hadn't been discussed, I don't think. What?
It's on the consent agenda. Yes.
Yes.
It is on the consent agenda, yes.
I want to get through. I want to get through.
Let's say 10. And, 12, we started to.
What time do you want to reconvene? What time do you want to reconvene?
So we'll convene at 7:50, 10 minutes of 8.
No, we're just going to
Stay on the same.
stay on the same one.
All right,
You may want to say that.
Yes, so we will convene the business meeting at 7:50, 7:50, or 10 minutes of 8. It'll be the same login. So if anybody does log out, just log back in, or you could just pause for a few minutes.
Michael, I'm confused about this. I don't know about this. Did our meeting, are we delaying our board meeting until 10 minutes till 8? So people have been waiting to join us. Oh, my Lord. That's cool. Okay.
There are consequences to being well hydrated.
Mark.
I say they're going to. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me ask you a technical question.